Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe Podcast.
And the Animation Deliberation Podcast.
Today we're coming to you live as we talk about the newest episode of The Bad Batch. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew, your host. I'm joined today by J Scotty St. Clair of the Animation Deliberation Podcast, who's partnering with us on the Bad Batch discussions. J Scotty, how are we doing today?
I'm doing incredible. Really enjoyed this episode, and I'm super excited to talk about it. And super excited to have Brian back as well. So,
yeah, Brian, glad to have you with us. Brian V. Klein, who's kind of a regular panda. I think at this point you have podcasted on every one of the different shows without being a host of any of them, which is quite a feat. I think we get you a bingo chart pretty soon. How are you doing today?
The reason for that is that's because I don't have to do any of the postal show work, like the editing or stuff. But I'm actually doing great. It's great to be back in the actual. Not this time. We're not in the secret lab on Camino like we were for the first episode when we were all together. But like J Scotty said, this was an action-packed episode, and can't wait to talk about it.
Awesome. All right, well, let's just get started there. What'd y'all think of this episode? Give it kind of some general thoughts.
BVK, take it away. What you got?
I loved right off the bat that there was a couple cool shout-outs to some older properties like the Clone Wars, and then once they got onto the planet, or actually it's the moon, but once they got on there and just started the whole point of it didn't move the plot along, but it was such action-packed, and just seeing the characters and seeing Omega. Every episode I love Omega more and more. There's a character that when she was introduced beforehand I was sort of indifferent about, but now it's like I can't wait to see her on screen because she's just like the wide-eyed innocence of her exploring all this stuff is.
I felt like this episode was interesting because you're right, it didn't really move the plot along, and on one level it feels like it was kind of filler. But it also kind of reminded me, like, this show is not doing the Disney Plus 6 episodes, 8 episodes. We're going to rush and tell you everything as fast as we can. This show is really taking its time. It's much more like a traditional, like, you know, the kind of shows we used to get all the time where there might be a looming plot in the background, but there's also just a lot of, like, letting the characters live in the world and letting the characters get to know them. And I think I think I could have dealt with a little more plot in this. Like, I would have liked a little bit more of, like, what's Tarkin up to in them, but just getting to have more, I mean, getting Shand introduced was fantastic, and the action was great. And you're right, I just liked seeing more of these relationships develop with all the characters.
I think there was one actual thing a plot point that sort of wasn't, it's not really a plot point, but Wrecker keep hitting his head in every episode. I think that is going to end up coming to it's something big's going to happen with that, because last week when he just had those headaches and he hit his head and the whole chip thing, I think something's going to happen with that character. Good or bad, I don't know.
Yeah, for me, I know one of the expectations and hopes I kind of voiced for this series is that it would, fill in some of those gaps for that Rogue One kind of time period. And for me, this episode definitely did that. I got, just the inclusion of the character of Fennec Shand, tying it back to the Mandalorian, getting to spend time on this moon, Pantora, a planet that I was not familiar with. I was not familiar with either planet that got mentioned at the top of the episode, but I really loved the imagery, just getting to see all these different alien species. It took me right back to that original trilogy, being there almost in Mos Eisley Cantina. That Celestin character gave me like Watto vibes, so it's just doing exactly what I wanted it to do. It's like uniting all the various corners of the fandom, and that synergy is just there. So I can agree with some of the things you're saying about not much plot there, but I wouldn't qualify it as a filler. Between the camera work, the animation, the action, the character interactions, like Tech and Wrecker stick out particularly. I love some of their interactions. Just stellar episode for me from top to bottom.
Definitely, I can hear that. So, Brian V. Klein, you're basically our walking, talking Wikipedia. Can you tell us a little bit more about Pantera and what's the Pantora? Pantera is a band I really enjoyed in high school.
Yes.
Pantora. What's the significance of that planet that we went to today?
Okay, so back in season 1 of the Clone Wars, there was an episode called Trespass, where the main planet, Ordo Plutonia, which is an ice-covered planet, has a moon. I mean, Pantora is the moon, which is where, if you notice, all of the people that were native there, a lot of the vendors and the police had blue skin, because that's what the native Pantorans have.
Interesting.
But the Order of Plutonia, there was an episode where Obi-Wan and Anakin had to go, and there was quote-unquote creatures living on this planet, which are the Tals. If you remember from A New Hope, in the cantina scene, there was one creature which was a tall, like, white furry creature. They had, like, a little straw almost for a mouth.
Yes.
That's the character.
Okay.
And they were inhabiting that planet as they had, like, a settlement there. They realized they were sentient, and it was actually really cool, and another clone-based, action-packed episode, sort of like how this one was. The first planet they mentioned, the Idaflor, was a brand new planet. I double-checked on that on Wikipedia this morning. It's amazing. I'm watching the show at 2 o'clock. At 2:30, when it ended, I go on Wikipedia, and there's already a full page for this planet. I go, there must be a team of people that just go, bam, and put it right on. I'm like, oh, I guess it is brand new.
Yeah, to me, it's funny. Before we were talking about how we're a little bit sad that a lot of the great Marvel TV shows, like on Netflix, are no longer going to be canon. And I get the concern of you don't want someone to go to the movie and feel like they don't understand because they haven't seen the earlier TV show. I feel like Bad Batch is right now giving us a master class in how to acknowledge that earlier content without it ever being less accessible. Because, like you said, J Scotty, like, I don't think you didn't feel like you lost out on this episode at all by not having known what Pantera was, right?
Not at all. And, I've been on record saying I have not watched the Clone Wars, but I do have that connection to the films and whatnot. But I'd be really interested to hear from somebody, like this is their first foray into Star Wars. I think you're totally right. I don't think it matters what your level of familiarity is. The show is doing a excellent job of telling, compelling story, giving us compelling characters, and planning those references and callbacks to the greater lore without losing you. So yeah, great call there.
Yeah, I think exactly, because like I had such great moments, like Pantera, I love this so much. Even though I can't pronounce it properly, but yeah, I saw my volume's a little bit quieter. Yeah. I've now turned it up a bit better. Is that better? Hopefully that'll be better. So let's talk about something else we get in the episode. First of all, we get Fennec Shand has shown up. How do y'all feel about seeing her? And also, this is one of those times where a character we've seen live action now appears animated, which is always going to be a little bit of a switch. But I had no trouble seeing the same character. I was like, especially because it's her 20 years earlier, I think that gives a lot of leeway to be like, of course, it's not going to look she's not going to look exactly the same. But I had to hear that voice for like 3 seconds, and I just knew exactly who she was, and I was so ready to see where that story went.
Oh, exactly. And also, if you ever look at what Ming-Na Wen looked like 25 years ago, she looks the same then as she does now. So she doesn't age in real life. So her character probably doesn't age either like that. But yeah, it was totally recognizable as soon as you saw the helmet. It's like, here we go. Yeah. Another connection, which is what they're like. Again, it's not another thing because they never even mentioned her name or what she was other than a bounty hunter in the show. So it's not beating it over the head where it's necessary to know, but it gives people the opportunity to dig a little deeper and be like, oh, okay, and then you could also look at that property now then.
Exactly. Yeah, because again, Fennec Shand, she's very well known now because she appeared in The Mandalorian, which is very popular, but she's never appeared in a movie. So I think that's another case where, even if you haven't seen her before, though I think the Mandalorian, I think, is now one of the most watched of the Star Wars properties.
Oh yeah, if you're sleeping on that, then why are you listening to this podcast right now? Go watch The Mandalorian. Come back.
Definitely check out Mandalorian.
Yeah.
But I love seeing her because it was great seeing that she's very manipulative. Like, she was very good with Omega to start out with, and kind of convincing her. She goes into the combat, and she's clearly very good at the combat. Mm-hmm. And in terms of establishing, like, this is not just a kids show. I want to quote Panda regular Catherine Ray, who said, and I quote, "I was hella stoked to see a straight up murder," because that's kind of how I felt. Like, one of the first things we see her do is just throw a guy off a speeder bike, and often, like in the Clone Wars, you'd almost always get a scene of that person landing and looking like sad and upset and hurt, but okay.
Or them panning away, and you sort of have to allude with what happened.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to say, if it's the films, you'd probably have them fall off screen, accompanied by the Wilhelm scream.
The Wilhelm scream, yeah.
Right. But so we get that, which is like, okay, that person's probably dead. And then later, there's 2 cops who are chasing her, who she just straight up like shoots and they crash. So I was like, yeah, okay, we have a straight up killer on the screen now, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, there's no guessing on that one. Your imagination does not have to be used. That guy was shot point blank, and if he survived that, then more power to him. But the crash probably killed him as well.
Took out the other guy too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not only that, he hits that, they crash, they hit the wall, they explode. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause-
she's got 2 cops and a civilian dead so far, so we'll kind of keep a track of that.
And that's what shows it's leaning a little bit more towards, I think, away from the kid side, because I remember originally when the Clone Wars was on, it was on Cartoon Network, and there was one scene in an episode where Asajj impales a clone, and in the meantime, she pulls his head closer to him and gives him a kiss while the lightsaber is going through him, and that sent the censors in a tizzy. So when they actually aired it the second time, they had to frame it to where they didn't see the blade and they just saw the kiss. And now in this one, it's just that's not even cause for any kind of concern anymore.
Yeah, I remember seeing that scene, and it's so out of touch with anything Star Wars. I mean, it was a great scene, and I'm sure a lot of young people discovered a lot of things about themselves watching that scene. But it was so that's not what I expect from the Clone Wars.
Even back then, I had I wouldn't even call it unnatural. I mean, the character of Asajj was such a sexy and just well-developed character. You couldn't help but, her evilness was just, there was an attractiveness to it.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I also really like about, and we'll talk more about Shand in a moment, but I like that we have this interesting scene where Omega says to Shand, Shand kind of sets something up. She knocks into someone, some fruit spills, and then they steal the fruit. In what's one of the least subtle ways I've ever seen. I have no idea where the fruit seller was looking, and they didn't obviously see it happen. But putting that aside, and then Omega says, isn't that wrong? And Shand says, it's okay to break the rules sometimes. And so we've already established this kind of Omega is a little troubled by rule. She's very much kind of everything is supposed to be exactly right. But what I thought was so interesting is they do that in the same episode, where our heroes are basically stealing everything that's not nailed down. I get they needed money. I kind of feel bad for the guy who bought a droid that turns out not to be a droid. He's now out 3,000 credits. Some other person just had their own motorbike stolen by, I think, Tak or Echo. I like that we're getting the Bad Batch they're not choir boys either. They're pretty, they didn't kill anybody. Shand went a step further, but they were pretty happy to be okay, we need credits. Here's a droid. Oops.
The Bad Batch pretty much right now for us older folks, and some of you younger people will probably recognize it too. They are the A-Team. They are a rogue band of renegade mercenaries almost now that are going from job to job, living, because they're off. They're wanted. They have to. That was part of the one of the subplots of this show was them having to change their transponder so they're not their ship's not recognized anymore.
Right.
So now they're going to have to do a lot of things that weren't. They were designed to be the dirty workers anyway of the clones, but now they're using it as almost like a survival method.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but wasn't the series itself born out of the fact that George Lucas always kind of wanted to do his own Dirty Dozen?
Yeah,
so
correct.
That's
neat. For the most point, yeah.
I do want to bring up with that whole Echo acting as the droid. I love that haggling scene and determining exactly how much Echo's worth.
That whole thing, especially when he first had that, you'll be recognizable, and he's not like this. When they're on the ship, I go, they're gonna think he's a droid. And then when that whole thing happened, where they wouldn't take the whatever they were trying to sell, I think it was a bomb or something like that, or an explosive. Mm-hmm. It's they're gonna sell Echo as a droid, and then just they're hilarious. Because that's what shows this episode had such a lot of levity. It had a lot of humor, but then it also, like I said, had a straight up murder in it too. So
yeah, little this, little that. That's fine. Like a Die Hard movie. Yeah, I loved everything about that scene. I thought the haggling was hilarious. I loved Echo then dealing with the droids himself. When you have the kind of schoolmarmish 3PO line droid who's very upset about this. The astromechs who are just sure, let's go on an adventure. I'm down for that. All of them felt very much in line with the, these are new individual droids, although Pink might have been a reference to something from the Clone Wars. But they're basically all acting the way we expect. Astromechs have kind of a general style of acting. 3PO droids have kind of a general style, and they were all perfectly within that.
And there was also a newer droid that was the one I think that did the main repair. Sort of looked like Twiggy from the Buck Rogers, because he had the arms and the legs that were
the kind of vacuum tube arms.
Vacuum tube arms, which is kind of another throwback. They always seem to do a lot of light homages to other. Other properties from beforehand. So that one I think was either it was intentional. With Filoni now, anything that looks like it might be unintentional is probably 100% intentional. So
yeah,
sure.
I think it's very true. Go ahead, just go.
Just the other thing I wanted to say about that scene is that it's subtle but significant character growth for Tech, because like the last time we saw him have significant interaction with droids, I think was in the long first episode where the medical droids were kind of descending on him and he had that freak out moment. So
that's right.
I really appreciated that aspect of it.
That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, of course.
So let's talk about other things. One thing I thought was kind of interesting, and there's so many times where, like when I was watching the Clone Wars, honestly, I had to be careful not to give the writers too much credit, because it would be like, here's a really interesting thing where like it looks like the characters did something dumb, but maybe it's brilliant if you really go deep on it. And then you had to kind of remember, like, the writers are not going that deep that often. Sometimes they very much were. Here, though, I feel like they really often are. And so I'm wondering if you all caught this. Tech makes a big deal about how they can hide the ship by changing the code so that people won't be able to find it that way. And then the ship lands, and people do find the ship through the very, like, non-tech of just looking at it and recognizing it, like, people are looking for this kind of ship. It felt to me like that was kind of a blind spot Tech has, of, like, he's thinking so much in terms of, like, the high tech that he kind of forgets, like, someone might just recognize the ship.
I think he's looking more at the macro instead of the micro.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be that, because a lot of times when the transponder will be recognized, you're not in visual proximity of it. So with this literally landing in the bay, the guy just is like, oh, it's right there. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. It kind of reminds me of a couple of episodes prior when he had the idea to let the ship get abducted, but he kind of acted with autonomy and didn't know that Omega was on the ship. So yeah, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. As much as I love Tech, he's got some room to grow.
Yeah. I think they definitely all do. I mean, I wrote it down at one point. We get more Uncle Wrecker moments, which I now want I want Bradley in Wrecker's voice to cover a song by Uncle Cracker, because to me those two things are just so linked right now. But I wrote down he's good with
Uncle
kids.
Wrecker.
He's good with kids. He's bad with bounty hunters.
Oh yeah.
Because he has this great moment with Omega, and it's like, don't worry, I got it. And then Fennec just wipes the floor with him in one move.
In one move, yeah. I think that they're sort of, each one of those characters, each one of the Bad Batch, the main, were introduced as a very narrow vision. I mean, Tech was the tech guy, and Wrecker was the strength, and they are expanding their roles to be more, for lack of a better word, expansive, where it's not just, like you're saying, is that Wrecker is becoming more of a father figure to Omega, and so they're not just being, that this character is just going to do that. So I give the writers full credit for that one.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's not just Wrecker that gets taken out in like pretty much one hit by Fennec. Also, Rex gets, I love the choreography of that brief interaction that they had, but that's the second time he's been taken out,
Wait, Rex?
relatively easily. Yeah. Oh, not Rex. Excuse me, Hunter. It's the Rambo thing. He looks like he should be named Rex.
Okay. Oh, it's funny you go for Rambo, because like Rex is a very big character from the Clone Wars, which I know you haven't seen. So
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I think also one thing they're establishing there is they're giving us more of the characters, but also maybe they're really showing us like each of them is so specialized that when these 5 people are a team and they're all covering each other's deficiencies with their own things, they're phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But a lot of, like, Hunter on his own can do pretty good, but a lot of them on their own, like, you get Tech in a corner with a blaster, he's in real trouble. You get Wrecker against someone who can outsmart him, he's in real trouble. Each of them on their own can have some real problems because they're so specialized.
Yeah, that's such a valid point. But on the other side of it, I do think it just, makes Fennec Shan that much more badass, and seeing how
Also
capable
true, yeah.
she is. Yeah. Love to see it.
Yeah. Now, I'm not much of a visual fight guy, but I know you all were talking about it. Tell us about the fight scenes and like the chase scenes and what you all appreciated about those.
Yeah, I mean, they were just so high octane. The main thing that stuck out to me was the camera placement and the camera movement. We had a lot of tracking shots, and when it comes to animation, like that's a difficult thing to do, because not only are you having to animate the characters that much more, you're also having to take the backgrounds into account and, create the motion there, and especially in the environments that we were spending time in. Like, that was another thing that I appreciated about this planet. Not only did we get like vibes of the Mos Eisley Cantina and Tatooine, but there are obviously it was like a mini Coruscant in certain sections and whatnot. So like all the speeders flying by and everything like that. And again, I'll mention the particle effects when blasters hit something like that and the explosion, like just all so well done. But I will reiterate, the main thing that stuck out to me was the camera movement and the camera placement. Very well done.
And I can just say this, the chase scene was pretty much, that was a straight up homage to the Coruscant chase scene in Attack of the Clones when Obi-Wan and Anakin are chasing after Zam Wesell. Even to the point, if you go back and watch, a lot of the ships and speeders were 100% designed from the same speeders that were on Coruscant.
I thought I recognized the taxi.
Yeah, and even that, some of Kyner's musical cues had the same as that chase scene. Not quite the guitar riff from Attack of the Clones, but it had a lot of the heightened like high notes, and even some of the percussion in it matched so well with the Attack of the Clones scene. And which, if you're going to pay homage to a chase scene, especially with involving speeders, I mean, that's the best one you could do. So another thing you always watch, and I go back to a lot of times when we were watching the first episode together, and it was just always said, I can't believe this is an animated show. The use of shadow and light, and like you were saying, the camera angles, it's literally done almost like a live-action production, and it takes you out of it so much. And I'll reiterate what Catherine just said in the chat, is that everything was so easy to follow. The action was done so well, and it was so fluid and seamless that you almost feel like, with the camera placement, that you're there or part of the whole action too. Yeah. So kudos to them again. I mean, you can never say enough about the animation studio.
Sorry, I just have to bring up one sequence, like the fact that they chose to do it as one tracking shot. The fact that you get Fennec jumping from the vessel that she was on that explodes, falling onto that other one, and then doing the tuck and roll to land. Like, that was all. There was not a single cut there. So, like, that's just incredible. Yeah, the fact that you don't lose anything, you know exactly where the characters are, and nothing feels off. Yeah, it was so bombastic and incredible. Loved it.
And I love hearing that, because, like I said, I'm not a visually aware guy. I didn't notice any of those things, so I love hearing people talk about it. But I also I did really enjoy it, though. And like Brian, it's funny you talk about it being an homage to the Attack of the Clones scene. I feel like this was okay, Attack of the Clones, we can do it better, because and maybe here I'm in the minority. I hated that scene in Attack of the Clones. I just felt it was so. It just felt very repetitive, and like the same thing kept happening. And everything was so over the top that none of it made any sense. This one felt so, and maybe because it's not Jedi, it's real people. And like, you see Fennec Shand fall, and then clearly she's like limping. It like affects her. It just all felt much more like, this seems like real people doing things that have consequences in ways that I just absolutely loved it. And I remember being in the theater during Attack of the Clones and kind of like being a little bored during that scene. And here I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, so what other things do people really kind of jumped out about this episode? We're going to go into feedback in a little bit, so anybody who has questions or comments, there have been some great ones already, but especially if you want us to read on the air, go ahead and put it in the chat, especially if you can. We're going slow enough that we can find it, but especially if you tag J Scotty, we can definitely make sure to find it. But before we get to there, J Scotty and Brian, any other last things you wanted to bring up about the episode?
I like how they keep, I think every episode we're going to see in this season, they're beating the whole chain code aspect of the new empire into our heads. That's why, because when they introduced that in The Mandalorian, it was sort of just like, okay, what is this? And now they're pretty much saying, okay, now that you know it here, this is 28 years earlier or whatever, this is what the chain code is for. And it's a little more, it explains it a little bit better. It's still kind of confusing, but it's still, okay, this is, the way that pretty much everyone in the galaxy is going to be, it's basically like their driver's license.
Yeah. And because we talked about how kind of, there's a TikToker named Jedi Star Killer who I really love. I definitely suggest checking out his stuff.
Okay.
And he posted a TikTok earlier saying that he wasn't really sure how he felt about Bad Batch because he wasn't really knowing what the plot was. And I responded that I think there is a real plot here, and the plot, though, isn't about the Bad Batch. The plot of this season so far is about the slow kind of encroachment of the Empire and the Empire taking over. And even though we didn't get much of that, like we never saw Tarkin, we were never back in Kaminoa, which I would have liked, I felt like there were two things we got that were so important to that. One is, Brian, what you were just pointing out, like we're seeing more of the chain code happening, but also the scene of all the people on this planet seeming so happy about what's happening. You know, like, I think one we talked about before is, you know, if from day one everyone's like, oh my God, the Empire is so evil and terrible, you kind of wonder why everyone isn't part of the rebellion.
Right.
But what makes Tarkin and the Emperor so powerful is that they're good at manipulating people. They're good at understanding people have gone through this war. People have gone through this chaotic time. They want structure. They want order. And just that little scene of the Empire being like, we're here, we're generous, we're helping you, and everyone being happy, it just gave me chills. Because it was just like, yep, that's how fascism takes over.
Yeah. Totally agree with what you guys both said. And just the visual continuity, they're getting to see the hologram of Admiral Rampart again, like saying the exact same thing, kind of harkens back to getting to see, you know, Sidious's or Palpatine's address to the new Empire and whatnot from a different lens. But the last thing I wanted to highlight, BVK mentioned some of the music, especially in the action sequences there, but just Fennec Shan's theme is incredible. I love that. It was a real standout for me right there at the end of the episode when you thought she was gonna kill that guy for letting them get away, but kind of subverts expectations there, and can't wait to see the next time we see the character.
Yeah, she's a straight up killer for reasons, but not just a in cold blood type thing. She was doing it in the heat of the moment, and here if she would have just popped that guy for no apparent reason other than just him knowing she's looking for them. I mean, you basically don't waste an asset like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm finding it really good, and because I like that they're establishing, you know, the early Star Wars movies, much as I like them, are very clearly morally binary. You know, there's good and there's evil, and there's very little in between until you get to some of the later movies. I like here we're getting so many characters who are morally gray. You know, Fennec doesn't want to, like, you know, she's not into, like, mwah, ha, 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 I want to control the whole universe. She just wants to get paid and do her job, and if she has to murk people along the way, she'll murk people along the way, you know, and it doesn't make her a good person, but it's also like, yeah, she's not just straight up mustache twirly evil. She's willing to do a job and kill the people who get in her way.
Yeah.
I also, one of the things that I just really loved was right that early scene where they land on the planet and the kind of dock worker, like the person who's like in charge of the space station, Wrecker tries to bully him and just be like, you know, are you sure you can't overlook that? And at first, Wrecker thinks like, yeah, I use my strength. And then immediately the person's like, no, I don't care about how big you are. I'm getting paid. And I just thought that was just a great moment of Wrecker having to remember, like, yeah, you don't just solve everything with violence. You know, some people, you're not on the battlefield anymore. You just, like, being big and burly and threatening them isn't going to work. You sometimes got to cough up some money.
Yeah, one other thing that just kind of came to my mind as we're kind of getting towards the ends of our thoughts here, though. What did you guys think about the fact that Omega didn't know what a bounty hunter was? Like, that kind of threw me for a loop there. I would think with, like, she probably knew who Jango Fett was. I mean, did she not know that he was a bounty hunter? What is her level of knowledge? We got to, you know, see how sheltered she was already in a couple of instances, like discovering dirt and whatnot. But that was just something that I thought was a little surprising. What do you guys think about that?
I think it just shows how much either they kept from the main, because in the Clone Wars, it's obvious that the people that were training the clones on Kamino knew that they were based off of Jango Fett, who was a bounty hunter. But with Omega being pretty much raised by the Kaminoans, she seems to have been completely sheltered from anything outside of what she was privy to. And I don't think she was probably like in on a whole bunch of who the template was or whatnot. So, I mean, again, I think that's just pointing out how wide-eyed and innocent her character is, and everything is so new and fresh to her when she sees it for the first time, you know.
And my memory here is, and I haven't seen this movie in a long time, so I might be wrong, but my memory is that in Attack of the Clones, like when the Kaminoans are talking about Jango Fett, they do not call him a bounty hunter. They just talk about him as, like, you know, an important, like a great physical specimen. And so I can also understand that from the Kaminoans, that may not be something they want to bring up, you know, when teaching Omega. And also on that same level, I love just that one moment where she doesn't want to hide. You know, now that she's had a taste of adventure, the whole idea for her of, like, we have to hide on a planet, she hates that. She's like, no, let's go take on everybody together.
Yeah.
So it was really fun.
Agreed.
So let's go into some of the feedback.
Yeah.
And I just want to start with one thing. Catherine and then a couple people got into a discussion of this, pointed out that, like, how are we pronouncing the name? Is it Omega? Is it Omega? Is it Omega? And I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts, but I want to say Paul Hoppy, who's a Star Wars regular, he doesn't believe that 7 a.m. his time in California exists, so he's probably not going to be on one of these live watches. But he is going to be on we're going to do kind of a special episode to bring him on at some point. He wound up doing about 7 hours of watching YouTube videos on the exact details of the diphthongs in the New Zealand accent.
Wow.
To kind of like, and he kind of has this long thesis about how it's not quite Omega or Omega the way she's saying it. It's a sort of, it sounds like Omega to our ears, but it's a Omega. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it at all. But, we're doing a deep dive into the New Zealand accent, and we'll definitely be doing probably a whole episode on a linguistic depth that only 4 people in the universe want to hear, but you 4 people are going to love that episode.
Well, in true Star Wars fashion, though, it's probably both, because we got Leia and Leia, we got Han and Han. You know, it all depends on your vernacular, I guess. So it's Omega, it's however it comes out, I guess.
Jabba.
Exactly.
I've never heard Jabba.
I'm being goofy. I'm being goofy.
I got a friend, Paul Bateman, who is he's actually studied with Ralph McQuarrie for years. And he still calls the planet that Yoda lived on after the events of Revenge of the Sith, Dagobah.
Okay.
They literally say Dagobah in the movies. How can you not call it Dago? It's always Dagobah. Like, what?
That's fair. That's fair.
But,
and I think there's also, like, you can ask an interesting question of, does her character of Amiga, like, does she feel like they're saying the same thing, just that they have different accents, or is she just fairly shy and has new friends and doesn't want to correct them and say, like, you know, that's not quite my name? I'll be interested to see if by the end she does sort of say, like, hey guys, my name's not quite what you're saying, you know, or if they just all chalk it up to they just have different accents.
I think in this one too, in this episode, the one point that we had alluded to, there's the one scene when they were doing the haggling and she found the toy clone, like the doll, and then that whatever that animal was took it, and she just ran off after it to try to chase it. No, not thinking that she should have stayed or, you know, said something to Hunter, and next thing you know, Hunter looks and it's like, oh crap, my kid who I'm responsible for is gone. So I think she still has a lot of her naivety shows through in so many things that she does, but it's not, you know, it's basically just for the fact that everything is so new and fresh to her.
Yeah. And I think that's not, like, I know some people have said that it makes it feel like a little bit too much of a kid's show. I definitely thought that the first episode. I was not excited to see her at first. I feel like, though, they're doing, like, a very good job, which is a hard thing, of having a child character without it feeling like it's a kid's show. Because to me, it's so much about her naivete and her learning and her being the fish out of water and not everyone having to dumb it down to her. So I totally respect those folks who are just like, it's a kid on screen, I want nothing to do with this. But I feel like they're really doing a good job of it, which is a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay, other things from the commentary. People were really happy to see Ming-Na Wen showing up.
If you want, while you're kind of like looking through the chat, I didn't have too many people tag me, but we did have some people in the Stranded Panda chat, the network that we're a part of. There was a conversation that was started there by TJ Stafford, who's been great on all the shows I've ever been on. He's always been a great listener and always supplies a lot of great feedback. So if you don't mind, I'll just read what he said. So he's got, okay, Hunter, I think it's time we implant a tracker on Omega because she's still a kid and feels the need to wander away a lot. Yeah. Kids just do that, buddy. Plan ahead. Or here's a crazy idea. Maybe start training her if you're going to continue to bring her on your mission. Because this poor kid doesn't know anything about the galaxy and keeps stepping into dangerous situations. Either teach her to avoid them or teach her how to defend herself. Otherwise, pretty much every episode is going to play out like this. So happy to see Fennec Shan. She's quickly becoming a favorite. She was the best part of the episode. Also, Wrecker hits his head an awful lot. I'm convinced his inhibitor chip doesn't work because it was jarred loose by multiple concussions. Mm-hmm. So, a lot to chew on there.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. Thanks so much for putting that up in the group, and I'm glad we can talk about it here. I think it's a good point. I mean, I think that there's a certain level of Hunter is supposed to be like this great hunter. He can track things. He knows how they think. You got to at some point realize you can't just say to this kid, stay here, and she'll stay here. Like, at some point, I want to see Hunter make that connection.
And I think, like I said, with her being a kid, she automatically has that mentality of when she sees something new and it's like, oh, and then you sort of, don't think about the consequence of them leaving. It's just, oh, I want to check this out. So they sort of have to, I think, instill that in her to, at least be mindful of her surroundings before she just runs off into, whatever she's running after.
But even there, I kind of feel like part of what we're learning is, she has the impulsiveness of a kid, but also I think what we're getting is that when you've been locked up your entire life, telling her that she needs to stay still is probably just going to work, Put a tracker on, put like a little low jack on her, whatever you need to do.
As long as they don't do that, as long as they don't put like that kid leash on her.
Oh God, the harness.
God, that is just.
I see people have that. And I'm not a parent. I'm not judging any parents who are listening.
No.
Please keep the angry emails away from us for that. One thing people have been pointing out, I'm not quite sure what they're referring to, but Brian, I wonder if you caught it. People are saying that Turbo showed up in this. Do you know what that's referring to?
I think that's a reference to the DreamWorks
movie,
film that was about a snail that races. Ryan Reynolds voiced the snail. It sounds like tuck and roll might have been a catchchphrase from that. I'm not super familiar with it.
Okay, so we're going pretty deep cut on that. I like that.
Yeah.
And also Haley Hobbs points out that I keep wanting to say Pantora. I'm going to add some of their music maybe at the end of this. Pantora is a planet where we saw loth cats, or at least one of them, and we saw some loth cats in this. I didn't catch them, but anyone else see them in the background?
It had, they sort of had the resemblance, so I'm assuming that is more of a, it technically wouldn't be, a loth cat, because those are native to Lothal, but it's just like a species that is divergent from it, that looks like it, and, it's Star Wars. We've got Jawas and off-world Jawas, so...
Yeah. There's a lot of colonization happening all different places. People can take, there's different animals that live all around the world now because people took them various places. So it's certainly possible that a loft cat type thing evolved. But yeah, I thought that was another really fun little...
Like in movies when they're on Mars and they say earthquake. No, it's a Marsquake because it's not on Earth. Mm-hmm. It's just a generalization of something.
Exactly. So I think that's all the feedback I've seen in the chat. J Scotty, was there any other things you saw in the Panda group?
Well, Zuhair, my co-host on Animation Deliberation, I hate that he hasn't been able to join us on as many of these conversations as any of us would like, but he did reach out to me with some of his quick thoughts on the episode, and he's got some great insights here. So he says, quick blabber on this episode. The animation quality with the lighting and contrast is so nice. The doll under the spotlight, the bay manager in the dark office, it looks so beautiful. I also watched Attack of the Clones the other day, and the sound effects between Obi-Wan and the bounty hunter were very similar in the scenes of this episode. Gotta love some good consistency. Hope that was spoiler-free enough, but I had to get it off my chest.
Yeah. That's all. And that's, again, where I'm so glad we're doing this in partnership with not only the Star Wars Universe podcast, but the Animation Deliberation podcast, because I feel like there's scenes, to give you an idea of just the level of, not a visual as aware person. I watched the end of the hallway fight in episode 1, season 2 of Daredevil, and was like, yeah, that was really good. I kind of wondered what I liked about that so much. Yeah. And my buddy Paul said, well, it was all one shot, right? I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I noticed that now. So I'm focused on the story, the characters, the dialogue, and I love that you and Zuhair are catching that kind of stuff, because I think it's such an important part of what we're talking about here.
We do have real-time feedback from the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast itself. Matt Carroll saying Season 1, Episode 2 is what you're referring to there.
Isn't that what I said? I thought I said that.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I think that's what you said.
Okay.
It's early in the morning. I'm not going to always get these things right.
But to reiterate your point, too, when you were saying about how it's... I think everything that is done through the Stranded Panda Network is sort of like... the collaborations that are done between... We have so many different... people that have sort of a main focus, but you could always grab from a group of people and say, hey, if we're dealing with this, we could get this insight because this person or group of people have more of a could dig deeper into it. So that's what's great about the whole network.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And I would give J Scotty a chance to kind of talk about that, but I just want to give kind of the last thing. Was there any other last feedback or comments we had from anybody?
That's all that I've got here.
Okay. So I guess then for the two of you, kind of starting to wrap this up, is there any kind of last comments, one last thing about the show that you didn't get a chance to talk about or mention?
No, pretty much we covered everything on my notes. I have written really big, wide-eyed Omega because it's just her. And again, this with Wrecker's parental, side of him that he probably didn't even know he has, that he's so protective of her. And like when he finds out that when Tech locates her, he's like, I'm going to get her, and just like runs off into the sewer or whatever to go save her is just so. I mean, like I said, these characters, the character development for the characters in the first 4 episodes has been a lot more than I thought was going to happen, and it's pretty refreshing.
I think so too. Yeah, I would like to start getting more about Tech because I feel like he's still the one who feels the most one note to me. Like we're starting to get like that maybe because of his tech knowledge, he doesn't see some other things. But like I liked when earlier in the season, him and Echo were having a lot of conflicts where they were both kind of coming at it from similar but different viewpoints. So I want to see some more growth from Tech, but the rest of the characters, I think you're right. We're getting a lot more of Hunter, a lot more of Wrecker. Hopefully we're going to get back to Crosshair. Like at this point, I would kind of love an episode that's just about Crosshair and Tarkin. And like
nice.
That what's going on.
Or if they do one where it's like it's a sort of they come together and one episode is from the perspective of the Bad Batch, and then the next episode is the same scene but from the episode or from the perspective of Crosshair and the Imperials now.
Oh, that could be good, yeah.
That would be just interesting. But I think going back to what you were saying about Echo too, I think what's taken him a little bit more is the fact that he is actually he's a regular clone. He was just one that was pretty much left for dead, and they rebuilt him after he was taken, when they were, basically had him hooked up as a living machine. So he's learning to not be the standard, run-of-the-mill clone. And they're learning to accept him as being he did have the chip that malfunctioned, and he did have the regular training, but he is now sort of becoming part of the Bad Batch, even though he was not technically a Bad Batcher.
Yeah, I think he's definitely that sort of adopted thing who at first was kind of like, okay, I guess you can hang out with us, but now is very much like one of the team and has his own skills and stuff he brings to the table, which is pretty great. Well,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just my last thoughts here. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Crosshair. It's a testament to the show that we had an episode entirely without Crosshair, and it still ended up being one of my favorite episodes of the season. And Crosshair is probably my favorite character at this point. So, just a testament to the quality of the show.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, everybody in the chat. For both of you, J Scotty, St. Clair, we've talked about how this is in partnership with the Animation Deliberation Podcast. What else do you have going on? If people want to check out stuff on the Animation Deliberation Podcast, for example, I don't know, you doing anything else today, maybe?
Yes, indeed. Right after we wrap up here, we will be doing a live watch on the Stranded Panda scener for MODOK Episode 1. That's on Hulu. And then that will be followed by a live cast that will be right back on this Twitch channel. In addition to that, we did just do our Invincible feedback episode, so looking forward to getting that out there. And it's just a fantastic time to be a fan of this content and animated content in particular. Masters of the Universe just got a lot of good imagery out there as well. Superman and Batman have new series on the way, and I guess there's also an Injustice movie that's down the road. So we got a lot to cover. So I look forward to having you guys, partnering with you in the future and having both of you guys on for various discussions. It's going to be a blast.
Definitely. And I just want to give another strong recommendation. I'm looking forward to what you guys have to say about MODOK. I know nothing about that one, so I'm kind of excited to jump in totally blind. Yeah. But the way you all gave coverage of Invincible, a show that I looked at the previews of, had no interest in whatsoever. I kept hearing you all talk about it and got pretty excited about it. And as I posted in our Facebook group, the warning I now have is that if you ever get me excited about a TV show, it means you have to then come on an episode of Superhero Ethics. And Zuhair was good enough to let me kidnap him. We had a great discussion about a lot of ethical questions from Invincible. So check that out on Superhero Ethics, but definitely check out what you all are doing on the Animation Deliberation Podcast. I think it's great stuff. And to me, the fact that you both, like, the highest endorsement I can give is that I'm not, like I said, I'm not an animation guy, and I don't like the visual stuff as much. And the fact that you can suck me in as well as get the people who love the animation style, it just, I think, is a great testament to what that podcast is doing. Well, and Brian B. Klein, like I said, you are not hosting anything yourself yet on the Stranded Panda Network, but I know you do some hosting other places, and you're kind of just our utility infielder at the network now. So tell us more about where people can find you.
You can find me. I do a regular podcast on the Star Wars Rebel Force radio network called the Babu Freak. So if you want to check that out, you could just go to rebelforceradio.com or their Facebook page, or it's not that hard to find if you Google it. But on, like I said, I appear on a lot of the shows on the network. I'm in the Stranded Panda chat. I'm one of the mods there, so I interact a lot with people there. So just, come say hi and talk about whatever.
Right. Well, and to all you listeners at home, please always feel free if you have some time at 9 a.m. Central on Friday mornings, whether because you're not working till later, or it's earlier before work, or you're just like, jobs, whatever. Always feel free to jump on with us here. But also, please always feel free to give us feedback at any other time. We're doing these, obviously, very soon after the episode has launched. But I think we're going to try and make sure as we get more emails and comments, we'll start these episodes by talking about any feedback we got on the last one. So, best way to find us, I do all my podcasting at The Ethical Panda. So you can go look for The Ethical Panda on Facebook or on Twitter. You can email me at theethicalpanda@gmail.com, or go to the website, theethicalpanda.com, and that's where you'll find all the different podcasting that I'm doing. And of course, as we keep talking about, this podcast, along with so many others, is a part of the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. If you go to strandedpanda.com, you'll find all the information about that. If you search for the first name, it's the Stranded Panda Podcast Chat Group. Is that the name of it? If you just search for Stranded Panda Groups on Facebook, you'll find it. We have more than 1,000 members there. We have all sorts of discussions about these shows. We're actually very good about spoilers. It's a 48-hour spoiler policy, so, you are expected to kind of watch something pretty quick. But, for those times when we've watched something and you can't watch it till the next day, we do make sure things are nested for spoilers. We really do a lot to make it a great community. We have a pretty strong finger on the boot button for any kind of toxicity. Really, we just want to make it a place for fans to have a safe place to just love what we love without all the nonsense that can sometimes go along with it. So please check out strandedpanda.com. Check out all the other great podcasts we're doing. To J Scotty and Brian, thank you so much. To all of our people in the chat and who wrote in, thank you all so much. You're awesome. Have a great day.
Roger.
No!